One review I read said this book is a psychoanalyst's wet dream. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric. Thanks so much for watching. Sometime in the future, I plan to make a video going into detail how I choose which books to read. And I also just want to set a reminder of why I started this channel in the first place. I follow a few book reviewers on YouTube, and I'm always glad when they highlight a book I haven't heard about before, or even a book that I have and they make me think about it in a new way. I've received a few negative comments lately of people asking, "Why should I listen to you?" Or "Who asked you?" Who asked me? Well, no one really. No one ever asked me to upload videos on YouTube about books. But I offer my opinion anyway, and I hope that someone somewhere finds value out of it. Feel free to agree or disagree, or comment and tell me all about how you had to wash your eyeballs and ears out at the sight and sounds of my book reviews. I hope most people find value out of them, and 99% of the comments are positive. I sincerely thank you all for those kind comments. A few weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast while I was at the gym, and it was the Ryan Russillo podcast. He had a guest on called Adnan Virk, who's on the MLB network. Adnan also has a podcast called Cinephile, where he reviews movies. Adnan mentioned this podcast by the actor Paul Giamatti. Maybe you know him from movies like Private Parts, Big Fat Liar, or the TV show Billions. My favorite Paul Giamatti movie is Sideways. Adnan had great things to say about the podcast, and he also had great things to say about Paul Giamatti's book recommendations. So I checked it out. No, I never asked Adnan for his opinion, and I didn't ask Paul Giamatti, but I'm glad they offer their opinions anyway. I wouldn't have read this book anytime soon. Paul Giamatti's podcast is co-hosted by author and philosopher Stephen Asma. The podcast is called Chinwag if you want to check it out. They have friendly conversations about a variety of topics. My favorite episode so far has been about baseball, but they've also done episodes about mass hysteria, strange encounters in New Jersey, and even an episode about pizza. The episodes I have listened to are hilarious, and I always come away having learned something new. It's a great listen while you're in the car, on a walk, or even at the gym. In a recent episode, they talked science fiction books. Paul Giamatti is a voracious reader, and it seems like his favorite genre is science fiction. He said in an interview on the Stephen Colbert Show that he only acts in TV and movies to support his used bookstore lifestyle. Anyway, on the episode of Chinwag, he recommended and said his most favorite science fiction book is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. He also mentioned Philip K. Dick and a few other authors. I already reviewed PKD's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so if you're interested in that, check it out. I'll also put the episode to the Chinwag podcast in the description. I haven't read a lot of science fiction. It's not really a genre that I've explored. I've read Kurt Vonnegut, I've read Philip K. Dick, but there are still many excellent books in the science fiction genre that I one day want to read. The Lathe of Heaven is about a guy who can alter reality with his dreams. When he suspects a therapist is attempting to harness this power to change the world, shit gets really crazy. The book was first published in 1971, and the story takes place in 2002 in Portland, Oregon, where Ursula K. Le Guin happens to be from. We know in this dystopian future, the government tracks drug use through pharmacy cards. The state of the world is a mess. There's overpopulation, there's not enough food, which is causing protein deficiencies, and climate change has left the earth beyond repair. Before I summarize the main plot, I want to talk about the short opening of the book. There's a very descriptive scene of a jellyfish drifting and tossing in the sea. It's less than a page, but it's a powerful encapsulation of the novel. Le Guin writes, "The jellyfish is the most vulnerable and insubstantial creature. It is at the mercy of its environment. The jellyfish has entrusted its well-being to the ocean. It glides effortlessly through the sea until it is betrayed. Current-born, wave-flung, tugged hugely by the whole might of the ocean, the jellyfish drifts in the tidal abyss. The light shines through it, and the dark enters it. Borne, flung, tugged from anywhere to anywhere. For in the deep sea there is no compass but nearer and farther, higher and lower. The jellyfish hangs and sways. Pulses move slight and quick within it. as the vast diurnal pulses beat in the moon-driven sea, hanging, swaying, pulsing, the most vulnerable and insubstantial creature. It has for its defense the violence and power of the whole ocean, to which it has entrusted its being, its going, and its will. But here rise the stubborn continents. The shelves of gravel and the cliffs of rock break from water baldly into air, that dry, terrible outer space of radiance and instability, where there is no support for life. And now the currents mislead and the waves betray, breaking their endless circle to leap up in loud foam against rock and air, breaking. What will the creature made all of sea drift do on the dry sand of daylight? What will the mind do each morning, waking? It is with that final question that we meet George Orr. He is described as having his eyelids burned away. There's a reason Le Guin includes this story about the jellyfish. I'll talk more about this jellyfish opening and why it is included in the story a little later. But first, here's a little bit about the plot. George Orr first realized his dreams could alter reality when he dreamed his creepy aunt, who was living with him and making unwanted sexual advances toward him, died in a car accident. When he awoke, she had been dead for weeks. He was the only one who realized that reality had been altered. George turned to drugs to stay awake, attempting to lock the door to his effective dreams, as he called them. He was mandated by the government to see a therapist. George sees a therapist named Dr. Haber. When he has a suspicion that Dr. Haber is aware George's dreams do in fact alter reality, and that Dr. Haber is trying to harness this power, he enlists the help of a lawyer named Heather Lalash to help him get out of this pickle. Each chapter begins with an epigraph. Usually they are quotes from the Chinese philosopher Chuang Tzu. In an interview I watched, Le Guin said that she didn't intend the book to have a message, but that the book is tied to Taoism and Taoist principles. These epigraphs really enhance the story by placing a concept in the reader's head, and these concepts guide our thinking towards the characters and the story. I love this choice from the author. I'm a fan of authors using quotes from other sources to enhance themes and ideas. It's kind of funny that the title, The Lathe of Heaven, is taken from a mistranslation of Chuang Tzu. China didn't even have lathes when he wrote that quote. The poetic and violent imagery makes for a great title. If you've ever seen a lathe accident, maybe in person or on YouTube, you know that they can be really violent. Even a small lathe will rip gloves, shirts, or fingers off of a person's body. You can imagine that a large lathe would do some serious damage. Here's the full quote from the epigraph of chapter 3. Those whom heaven helps we call the sons of heaven. They do not learn this by learning. They do not work it by working. They do not reason it by using reason. To let understanding stop at what cannot be understood is a high attainment. Those who cannot do it will be destroyed on the lathe of heaven. In my opinion, the quote is saying, those who can just go with the flow, those are the people who will end up all right. Those who can't go with the flow, those are the people who will be destroyed on that lathe of heaven. I think George is considered one of those sons of heaven. Just like the jellyfish at the opening scene, he's at the mercy of his environment. He's completely 100% normal. Dr. Haber insults him later in the book by calling him a moral jellyfish, insinuating that he has no backbone. Dr. Haber reveals that George took a personality or some form of aptitude test, and the results confirm that George is so normal that it was incredibly not normal. He was exactly 50-50 in everything, right down the middle. Sort of like that yin and yang symbol. And in some cultures, that's seen as a positive, but Dr. Haber was referring to that as a negative. The quote suggests that the key to happiness is to be like the jellyfish. Don't try to understand too much. And George tries to do this. He accepts things the way that they are. Even though he wants to suppress his dreams, he accepts reality the way it is. There's no curiosity to try to harness this power, whether for good or evil. He tries to accept his environment, and yet he feels like he is being betrayed by his environment. Dr. Haber, on the other hand, is the opposite of George. He seeks to understand his environment, and he seeks to harness this power that George has. That's why Le Guin includes these epigraphs, and also that beautiful pre-story of the jellyfish, and also all of these Taoist concepts. She's not deliberately stating a message, but you can definitely find messages in the book. You might take away that the message is, in order to be truly happy, you just have to go with the flow, at least as much as you can. Here's a couple of other thoughts I had while reading this book. One man's curse is another man's blessing. George never wanted to alter reality. He was terrified of this power. But Dr. Haber was intrigued. I thought about social media and the constant comparison we have to others. I also thought about hard versus soft science fiction. This book is more accessible than hard sci-fi because it maintains the human element at the forefront. Guin said she really just wanted to write a good story. Her writing is great and very accessible. I saw in some documentary or something that Kurt Vonnegut was often put down because he was easy to read. But they say it's not easy to write things that are easy to read. Even though The Lathe of Heaven has sci-fi and fantasy aspects of the story, it is rooted in the human condition and the characters are pretty normal people. Another question I thought of, is it worth it to try to change the world? Even with Dr. Haber's good intentions, things didn't go as planned. What does that say about religion, charity, helping the downtrodden? Is all of that just a complete waste of time? Is this book a critique of utilitarianism? These are some questions I thought of while reading. And depending on who you are and when you read this book, you may find a completely different answer than someone else. So was Paul Giamatti right? Is this book really that good? I would say yes. I absolutely loved it. I love when writers of science fiction really flex their prose and poetic voice. Guin does this a lot. And thinking about it, so does Philip K. Dick. And I think that's why I like this type of science fiction the most. If you are into psychology, you will absolutely love this book. One review I read said this book is a psychoanalyst's wet dream. And even if you aren't into psychology, it's still a really entertaining book. So who should read this book? Really anyone who loves reading. Seriously, give it a try. Listen to me, listen to Paul Giamatti, listen to Adnan Virk. Go to your library like I did and pick it up. Go find a used bookstore or a library or find some way to get your hands on this book and give it a try. It's a short book. It's only 184 pages, so it's worth a shot. This book was definitely the right thing for me, and now I'm glad I can say I read a book that was recommended by Paul Giamatti. So thanks, Paul. Thanks, Adnan. Keep the recommendations coming. Well, that was my review of The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it valuable. I'm sure I didn't touch on everything, so if you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button, or send this video to someone who you think would enjoy it. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and as always, read the right thing.